Hi, folks. Welcome to the very first episode of season 2 of Alicia's Desk Storytime. Well, technically it would be spooky storytime, but today it is storytime. Well, the story I present for you guys is going to be a little unnerving. It's not quite spooky. So, this one's a little bit longer than normal. Normally they'll be about 7 to 10 minutes. This one is probably about 16 minutes. And it is called Change That. This story is about what happens when a young painter gets too close to the truth with her work. Miss Charlie Alden is about to find out that our oceans hold secrets beyond imagination, and truth is often stranger than fiction. Let's dive in, shall we? The weather was warm this spring, and it was an absolutely gorgeous view from the booth window where I sat having my coffee at Jenny's Diner. Normally I would be enthralled by the weather, but today I was transfixed by a fantastical sight. I stared at the man across the table from me. At the flick of a button on a copper cuff bracelet wrapping his left forearm, all semblance of human features had disappeared. I stared slack-jawed at the true-to-life gill man wearing a deep brown suit and tie that sat in the seat opposite me, drinking a cup of black coffee. What I was seeing was impossible. I rubbed my eyes as no one else at Jenny's Diner, my usual hangout spot, when I was running through ideas for an upcoming art project and my apartment got too cramped, deemed anything unusual, even though I was having coffee with a 7-foot-tall amphibian. The red-headed waitress in the satiny pink diner uniform that came by our table to check on us didn't so much as bat one of her heavily mascaraed eyelashes as she refilled Mr. Graves' coffee mug and even flirted with him. Watching him flirt back was quite the experience. I sat in shocked disbelief, my own mug of coffee steaming in front of me and fogging up my overlarge round glasses that I needed to use after too much art time. I pulled my mossy green cardigan tighter around me, its soft, well-worn texture creating a barrier between me and the strangeness that I had come face to face with. Even though the day was warm enough, I felt chilled to the bone. As our waitress left with a wink and Mr. Graves' order of pecan pie, he turned to me, all traces of playfulness gone. "Miss Alden, I assume that you can understand part of why I called you here today." The finny parts around his jawline twiddled, and he fixed me with an intent gaze. I stared into those large, unblinking orbs. They seemed to glow with an oddly yellowish light, and my unease grew. He said, "I would like to explain the rest." I took a deep breath and a large pull from my mug, still wondering if I had lost my sanity and this was all a hallucination. I eyed Mr. Graves. "I think that would be best," I said. I steeled myself for the coming conversation as best I could. You see, Mr. Marion Graves had contacted me a week ago following my social media post of a sneak peek of the art piece that I was putting into a Hollywood movie monster art show at the end of the month. I had decided that my subject was going to be the ever-popular Gillman. He had asked me to please feature a less aggressive monster. I had been perplexed, but didn't really want to rework the piece as the scales had been more of a challenge to work with than I would have liked, so I told him no. He had asked me to meet for coffee, and so he could explain. And now here I was, with a much better understanding of why Mr. Graves wanted a less aggressive take on the movie monster I chose to depict. I've always loved anything to do with myth and legend and been working on many cryptid paintings over the years, but nothing could have prepared me for one of my subjects walking up and sitting down beside me, especially one that I had thought was strictly fictional. He cleared his throat, an oddly garbly sound, and began, "Miss Alden." "Charlie," I said. He smiled and nodded. "Charlie, my people are very careful about our image. We have never been truly seen by any sentient species. We have gone to great lengths to keep this visual anonymity, as there is a great deal of safety in it. And the movies and artwork before this, as well as the myths and legends, they're not included in any of that?" I felt my eyebrow work up. His explanation was not making much sense. He fixed me with those eyes again. "Charlie, do any of those creatures, those depictions, do they look like me?" I considered for a moment, tilting my head this way and that at him. "No, actually, no, they don't. You look something like what I've seen, but all of the work got it wrong. You look a lot like my painting, though." "Why?" I was genuinely perplexed. He sighed and wrapped his hands around his mug, staring into it while he spoke. Because every once in a while an artist or author gets it right. All creative ideas, be they written or works of visual art, come from some sort of truth. The creative mind is able to tap into something like a collective consciousness. Oh, I perked up. Like the Akashic Records? He shook his head. No, but why doesn't it surprise me that you would be familiar with those? It goes farther or perhaps wider than the Akashic Records. Also, it goes back further. It is a place that only a creative mind can reach, generally in a burst of almost trance-like working, a fervor of sorts. And you, Charlie, have tapped into that and found my people's truest form, and you put it on canvas. Which is why we need you to redo your piece. There cannot be any true record of how we look, and if you could adjust it so it's less violent, that would be wonderful too. I swallowed. So I got it right. I saw it in my head and thought I was getting it all wrong. I tried so many times to change it, but the image in my mind wouldn't go away, so I painted it as I saw it. I sighed. He looked chagrined. I'm so sorry, Charlie. Yes, you did a marvelous job. It's beautiful and spot on, which is why it can never see the light of day. I am truly sorry, but my people's safety depend on anonymity. I was staring out the diner window by our booth. It had started to rain, and the images outside blurred and twisted. And all of a sudden I saw a scene straight out of a horror movie. Only the subject of horror were a batch of people that looked a lot like Mr. Graves. It was all out war. The streets were burning and everyone was dying. The weapons were all so strange, and there was blood and death and fire as far as the eye could see. Bodies everywhere. In the crowd, I saw a little girl with long blonde hair. She couldn't have been more than 3. She had tears streaming down her face and was screaming for her mother. I heard my name being called from somewhere far off in the distance, but couldn't pull myself away from her. My heart broke for her and the desperation that filled those screams. I heard my name again. It seemed closer, but I was lost in my vision. They would hit me out of nowhere, completely randomly. Many times I would paint what I saw in my visions if I could remember all of the images just to get them out of my head. I heard my name again. It was louder and closer. Charlie! Mr. Graves had a finned hand on my arm and was staring at me with concern carved on his fish-like features. I stared at him and blinked. My face felt wet, and I looked around to see if he had chucked a glass of water at me, but found them all full. I put my hands to my cheeks to realize I had been crying, and that my face and the neckline of my shirt were soaked with the tears. I grabbed a napkin and wiped my face, cleared my throat, and took a long drink of water. The cold helped settle my mind. One word was firmly engraved in my mind and on my heart: anonymity. Does this happen to you often, Charlie? Sometimes. Not with this kind of clarity usually, though. Why do you ask? The things that I see tend to stay with me, but I had a feeling this vision would be one that I remember even on my deathbed. Good God. It was horrifying and heartbreaking at the same time. His fish-like mouth twisted in a very human-looking expression. Charlie, please tell me what you saw if you feel like you can talk about it. It's important. I nodded and told him everything. His expression turned very grave. Charlie, you are clairvoyant, someone who can see beyond the here and now. Some have been called seers, witches, prophets, what have you over the years. I believe that you have had a vision of a future where my people are brought to light. We have seers among my people, and one of them sent me here. They were only able to get half of the vision, the half that pertained to my people. I believe you got the rest of the message. If that's the case, it is no wonder that you were able to tap into our world so accurately. There's more to you than meets the eye, Charlie, that's for sure. I mulled that over and sipped at my coffee. Why didn't you tell me about your seer before? I didn't think you would believe me, and honestly, the fact that you've suspended your disbelief thus far is amazing. I didn't want to add the drama of a prophecy to an already potentially volatile situation. I nodded. It was practical. I could appreciate his point of view. Charlie, I think it's best if you give us your painting for safekeeping. I didn't like it, but I nodded. I think you're right. It was best if his people drifted out of everyone's mind until our two species could come to some sort of peaceful coexistence, and God knows how long that could take. He blinked and nodded. How much would you like for the piece? I stared at him. What? We are not going to just take it. You need to be paid. So what is your price? I smiled. Answers. He laughed. Why does this not surprise me? Fine. I will give you $5,000 for the painting. A lot of effort went into it. What would you like to know? I was taken aback. Wow, they were really civilized. Then excitedly I said, everything. He shook his head and laughed. How about we start with one question at a time? What would you like to know first? I opened my mouth and closed it several times, finally settling on, why can't anyone see you? I can see you. Why no one else? His voice held a smile. His expression, however, remained unreadable. You can see me because I dialed back the perception filter I'm wearing within a 2-foot radius. It was to get past the inevitable disbelief that comes with this kind of conversation. To you, I am a 7-foot-tall, amphibious-looking aquatic humanoid. To the rest of the diner, I look like a mild-mannered accountant with thinning blonde hair and glasses. He tapped his horn-rimmed spectacles for emphasis. We prefer to blend in, for obvious reasons. I blinked and shook myself. Wow! Okay, so I know that the movie director based his creature on an amalgamation of 3 separate myths from the Tupi tribes of the Amazon. Some even say he took some inspiration from Lovecraft's work. You don't fit this description of Alara, so would you be a Yakaruna or a Ipupiara? Or was Lovecraft more on the money than people think? I sounded wary even to myself. Mr. Graves burst out laughing. He laughed so hard that he had to dab his eyes with a napkin. Oh, my dear young lady, none of the above. Also, we predate the Devonian era by a millennium or so. We've been around an extraordinarily long time, hence the advanced technology that you saw in your vision. Atlantis, pre-Atlantean. We watched their rise and fall from a safe distance. They were overly ambitious, too ambitious for their own good, and everyone around them's good. We did help with the cleanup in the aftermath. Did they know about you? Absolutely not. It would have been far too dangerous. I shuddered. All right, back to the movie for a second. It was a true story. He sipped his coffee. I blinked at him. What? He nodded. So you're telling me? He sighed. Yes, the movie was based on an encounter with one of our people. And yes, he held up a forestalling hand as though he'd been asked this before. That idiot did try to take the scientist's mate. Creole was always a dumbass. Even though he was one of the brightest minds of a generation, he was a complete fool when it came to females. He heaved a tired-sounding sigh. That sounded like a very well-worn sigh. I knew how awkward I must have looked, but Graves gave a groan of disgust. Do you think that we have remained hidden by running around starting fights, killing humans, and kidnapping women? Seriously? I stammered, wow. Okay. Next question. So how did he heal from the kidney shot? I mean, I know it's a movie and completely dramatized, but I've always wondered about that. Think about it. Graves sipped more of his coffee. I spread my hands in a surrender gesture. I don't know. How would I know? If a species is compatible, we can transfer a healthy organ from the donor. Holy wow. So if he hadn't gotten shot, nobody would have died. Not quite, but yes, essentially. Wow, so was this technically a movie glorifying a home invasion? I was slightly aghast. Talk about a perspective check. He twisted his face a bit and glanced out the window. Not quite. Creole was in the Amazon to do some very important scientific work. He went out there specifically to study some of the climate change effects on the marine life out there, as it mirrors our home environment so well, and we all knew that we would need to prepare for the environmental changes to come. Thankfully, that little encounter only cost a few weeks of his time, and he got a heck of a mate out of it. Grace smiled a bit wistfully. My mouth dropped open involuntarily. Wait, you mean they got together? The movie depicts... He smirked and winked at me. The movie was a dramatized retelling. He took an extremely smug sip of coffee. Wow, that would take a bit to fully digest. Are humans and... I gestured to him. Your people? Well, Creole and Kate had 7 kids, so make of that what you will, he shrugged. My jaw dropped open again. That's a lot. He hefted his mug at me. Yes, it is. Once upon a time, we had children much as fish do. Over time, though, our procreational process came to mirror humans more and more out of survival. Believe it or not, carrying young within the body is much safer and keeps predators at a greater distance. It also helps that we are roughly 3 times stronger than a great white shark and twice as durable. Our offspring stood a better chance this way. I nodded. I could see that. So how many offspring would normally be produced at one birthing? He thought for a moment. Well, back then, anywhere from 3 to 12. Nowadays, around 1 to 3 per birth. As our environment changes, so do we, which was one of the things that Creole was studying. You talk as if you know him personally. Graves laughed. I do. We grew up together. Our people are long-lived. How long-lived? Originally, 1,000 years was a normal lifespan. Nowadays, 5,000 years is around average. He said it brightly. What? He nodded. The tales of the mythical Yakaruna being helpful to shaman healings and imparting medical know-how is not far from the truth. We have been helping here and there from the shadows throughout your history, but we have always had to be careful and could only come to those with an open mind. We have a great deal of knowledge, and our advancements are not limited to technology, medicine, communication, etc. We've had a long time to learn and research and have been a record-keeping species from the start. The server interrupted before Graves could speak further with another round of coffee and brought his pie. I ordered some tea as this was a lot to take in, and my brain needed a softer boost to help it along. She left with a wink and wrote her phone number down on a napkin for Graves. He took it with a smile and blinked and muttered, "Maybe I should have had her leave the pot." He chuckled. "Now, Charlie, are you really against interspecies dating?" He placed a hand to his chest and acted offended, then shot me a teasing look. I laughed. I never genuinely thought about it. I guess not, but wow, it is definitely a shock. Do your people date humans often? I asked. I was wondering how that worked out into their anonymity clause. He knew where I was headed with it. Yes, actually quite often. Remember, it is much harder to persecute people who are blended with your own. Originally, we took a completely segregated approach. After much deliberation, our elders came to the consensus that we needed to intermingle. The children from these unions are generally human with a peculiar affinity for water and aquatic environments. That part Lovecraft got right. Not the turning into fish monsters at middle age, though. I have a feeling that was his own way of dealing with a midlife crisis, middle age, aging, maybe facing his own mortality. But that's just a thought. My 2 cents. His pie sat in front of him. Out of curiosity, I asked, "Can you eat that?" He looked perplexed. "What, pie?" He gave me a dumbfounded look. "Yes." In response, he took a bite, appearing to savor it. "Of course I can eat pie. I can eat everything that humans do, and quite a bit more besides, such as raw jellyfish. Why do you ask?" "Oh, wow, well, because it was just sitting in front of you. I thought maybe you ordered it to blend in." "Seriously, Charlie? I waited because we were talking, and it's rude to talk with food in your mouth. I was being polite. Just because I'm an amphibian doesn't mean that I have no manners." He looked as though I was an idiot. "Sorry, I didn't know, and thank you for waiting, but go ahead and eat. I'm in too much shock to pay attention anyways." He chuckled and nodded. "Thank you. And you are right. I'm sorry for taking offense." Graves tore into his pie and gulped his coffee down, finishing with a satisfied smile. I waited till he was done. "I have so many questions, more than I could ever ask you in one sitting. What do I do?" He smiled bemusedly. "Well, then I guess we will have to just keep chatting. You know, I hear that there's a gorgeous little villa by the ocean out in Maine that just happens to be for lease for the next 3 years. $1,000 per year. I also know that you were looking to get out from your lease from that slumlord that you were renting from. So would you like to meet my people? Maybe figure out if you can start to control your visions more?" My eyes widened. "How did you know?" "About your apartment? I did some research. Asked around. Your landlord is terrible. And your downstairs neighbors have a roach problem. Burn some white sage in your place. Immediately. To drive out negative energy? No, to keep the roaches out. They hate that stuff." We both laughed. This was going to be the start of a very interesting acquaintanceship. Possibly a friendship. I did end up changing the painting. The Gill Man now reflects a fictionalized representation, and I drew inspiration from Creole and Kate's actual story. Apparently, they were very much in love until the day she died, and she made several valuable contributions scientifically to Creole and Graves' people. The painting was well received and enjoyed by all, but my original work hangs in Graves' people's Hall of Records as the first painting from a human seer to be able to work in conjunction with the people of the water. Well, folks, I hope you enjoyed. And catch us next time on Alicia's Desk, Storytime. Have a good day.